What if the idea of karma is not a mystical bookkeeping system somewhere in the sky keeping score of your good and bad deeds, but something far more ordinary and at the same time far more profound, something woven into the very structure of existence itself? Because when most people hear the word karma, they imagine a moral equation. You do something good and something good comes back to you. You do something bad and something bad returns, perhaps in this life or perhaps in another life. And this is the standard and traditional way of looking at karma. The idea that we as individuals are the product of actions performed in previous lives, that our current circumstances are consequences of earlier choices made by a version of us that we no longer consciously remember. And for many, this view provides a sense of moral order, a reassurance that nothing is random, that justice exists even if delayed, that suffering has an explanation and success has a cause. But there is another way of looking at karma that is less about reward and punishment and more about causation itself, less about moral judgment and more about the flow of energy and matter through time. And this second view is not focused on the individual soul moving from one body to another carrying a personal record, but on existence as a whole unfolding through chains of cause and effect, where the present moment is shaped by the past, not because someone is keeping score, but because that is simply how reality operates. When you drop a stone into a lake, ripples spread outward in circles, and those ripples interact with other ripples, and long after the stone has disappeared beneath the surface, the water is still moving, still responding, still adjusting, and in a similar way, every action, every event, every thought sets something in motion. And what we call karma may simply be the recognition that nothing occurs in isolation, that every present condition is the result of countless prior conditions, that this moment did not appear from nowhere, but emerged from an intricate web of influences stretching backward beyond your birth, beyond your ancestors, beyond even human history itself. Because if you look scientifically, the atoms in your body were forged in ancient stars billions of years ago. The oxygen you breathe was produced by organisms long before humans existed. The language you speak was shaped by generations of culture, and the habits you carry were influenced by family, society, biology, and random encounters. And so when you say, "This is my life," it is already a condensation of cosmic history. In the traditional view of karma, you are told that your current personality, talents, struggles, and relationships are consequences of actions performed in previous lifetimes. And whether or not one believes in literal reincarnation, the psychological structure of that belief carries an important insight, which is that you are not a blank slate beginning at zero. You are an accumulation of tendencies, patterns, and causes that preceded your awareness. And even in purely biological terms, this is obvious, because you did not choose your genetic inheritance. You did not choose the temperament you were born with. You did not choose the early experiences that shaped your nervous system. And yet all of these factors influence what feels natural to you and what feels difficult, what excites you and what frightens you, what you pursue and what you avoid. But the second view of karma moves beyond the individual and sees existence itself as governed by causation, by a law of unfolding, where matter and energy interact in lawful ways, where every present event is influenced by past events, and where the distinction between living and non-living becomes less rigid because both follow patterns of cause and effect. The wind shapes the sand dunes, the river carves the canyon, the storm rearranges the coastline, and human decisions reshape societies. And all of this is movement within a single process. And in this sense, karma is not about moral reward, but about continuity. Not about blame, but about pattern. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a long line of dominoes stretching back farther than you can see, and one by one they have been falling for ages, each one knocking the next. And when the domino in front of you falls and strikes you, you fall too. And from your limited perspective, it feels like, "I chose to fall." But in reality, you were part of a sequence already in motion. And this does not mean you are meaningless. It simply means you are participating in something larger, something interconnected, something that cannot be fully understood from a single position within it. In everyday life, we experience karma in very simple ways. When you speak harshly to someone and they respond defensively, and that defensiveness influences your next reaction, and soon an argument unfolds that neither of you intended at the beginning, and you might later say, "How did this escalate?" But if you trace it backward, you can see each link in the chain, each tone of voice, each misunderstanding, each memory triggered, and nothing appeared from nowhere. And the same is true when kindness spreads, when a small gesture of generosity inspires another, when a teacher's encouragement shapes a student's confidence, when a parent's patience influences a child's emotional stability, and over time entire families and communities are shaped by these invisible ripples. The deterministic interpretation of karma suggests that the present is always influenced by the past, and in physics this is simply the law of causality. In biology, it is evolution. In psychology, it is conditioning. In sociology, it is cultural inheritance. And in spirituality, it is karma. And perhaps all of these are pointing toward the same underlying principle, that existence unfolds in patterns, that nothing stands alone, that everything is relational. And when we resist this idea, we often suffer because we try to isolate ourselves from the web. We try to claim complete authorship over what was never solely ours. This does not mean that effort is useless or that responsibility disappears, because even within a deterministic system, actions still produce consequences. But those actions themselves arise from prior causes, and so rather than thinking in terms of isolated free will, we might think in terms of participation in an unfolding process, where awareness becomes the subtle space in which patterns can shift, where understanding the chain allows for different links to form, not because we stand outside causality, but because awareness is itself part of the chain. When people resist determinism, it is often because they fear it removes meaning, because if everything is caused, then where is personal achievement? Where is moral praise or blame? Where is the hero? Where is the villain? But perhaps meaning does not disappear when we let go of isolated authorship. Perhaps it transforms because instead of seeing ourselves as lone creators battling a chaotic universe, we begin to see ourselves as expressions of a vast process. And there is humility in that. And humility can be strangely freeing because if you are not the sole architect of your failures, you do not need to drown in guilt. And if you are not the sole architect of your successes, you do not need to inflate with pride. And in both cases, compassion becomes more natural, because you recognize that others too are shaped by conditions they did not fully choose. This is why some philosophies suggest that believing in determinism can soften resentment. Because if someone harms you, you may still set boundaries. You may still protect yourself. But you understand that their behavior arose from conditioning, trauma, biology, environment, and countless unseen influences. And this does not excuse harm, but it contextualizes it. And when you contextualize behavior, hatred loosens and understanding grows, and that shift alone can transform relationships. At the same time, seeing karma as universal causation removes the idea that the universe is personally targeting you with rewards or punishments, because storms do not strike as moral judgments, earthquakes do not choose victims, illness does not arrive as divine vengeance, and in a broader deterministic view, these events are movements within natural systems, and human suffering often arises not because someone deserved it, but because complex chains of events intersected in a particular way. If you look at nature, you see cycles everywhere, seasons turning, tides rising and falling, stars forming and collapsing, civilizations emerging and dissolving, and perhaps karma is simply the recognition that these cycles are not random but patterned, that existence swings like a pendulum, moving from one state to another, and human life, brief as it is a momentary expression within these larger movements, and when you zoom out far enough, individual triumphs and tragedies blend into a grand rhythm that began long before us and will continue long after us. And so the question shifts from, what do I get from life, to how am I participating in life? And perhaps even further to, what is life expressing through me? Because if existence itself is a flow of energy interacting with itself, then what we call I is a temporary pattern within that flow, a wave in the ocean, distinct for a moment, yet inseparable from the whole. And when the wave rises, it does not create the ocean. And when it falls, the ocean does not disappear. And in this way, the deterministic view of karma does not shrink you. It situates you within a vast continuity. It may be that the deepest peace comes not from solving the mystery of free will versus determinism, but from recognizing that we are always inside the mystery, never outside it, and that whether we frame it as karma, causality, energy, evolution, or divine unfolding, the present moment is shaped by countless prior moments, and yet within this unfolding, there is awareness, and awareness allows us to relate differently to what arises, not as isolated controllers, but as conscious participants, and in that participation, there is room for kindness, for patience, for humility, and perhaps that is the most practical insight of all. Because if everything is connected in a chain of influence, then even a small act of clarity or compassion today becomes part of the future's unfolding. Not because you stand outside the law of karma, but because you are one of its living expressions. Thank you for watching. Please share and subscribe for more.